What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be a two-part series. We're going to be redoing the wood grain trim in my car, all the trim on the doors and the dash and the piece around the shifter on the center console. I had previously vinyl wrapped the wood grain trim in my car. I'll show you a video of that here. As you can see in the video, the wood grain trim got messed up, like the vinyl wrap on it, around the radio on the passenger side across the dash for that piece, and then the piece that goes around the light switch on the driver's side. It was a little difficult to use the vinyl that I used to get it to wrap around the edges of the wood grain trim and stick. It was a thicker vinyl, just because it's actually textured vinyl. It stuck for probably about 4 or 5 months and then started to peel up, as you could see in the video there. I don't think that trying to redo it with that vinyl or a thinner vinyl is going to do me any good, because I think the tolerances around the radio and around the light switch are too much for it to deal with, and it just slowly peels up the vinyl wrap just because the trim kind of moves as the car is being driven down the road and stuff like that. So I'm not going to try to vinyl wrap it again. We're going to go the route of painting the trim. I'm not really sure what color I'm going to go with yet. I'll decide between now and the second video, because the second video is going to be us finishing, putting the paint down and getting it cleaned up and clear coated and all that stuff. This first video is going to be us getting the trim cleaned up, scuffed up. The trim that I got is actually just the same wood grain trim that's in my car now. This is out of another car. I purchased it from somebody on Facebook Marketplace. Like all the older BMW trims, there's some cracks here and there. As you can see here in this piece of wood grain trim here, there's cracks. This is a passenger side piece. This is a passenger rear door, and then the piece that goes around the light switch has a pretty good crack in it there as well. I'm going to get those cracks fixed. We're going to get these scuffed up and primed and get them ready for paint. We're going to go over how to do all that in this video. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is to get everything roughed up. This clear coat that's on this factory trim will not hold paint. I can assure you. I've never tried it, but anytime that I've ever tried to put paint over top of anything that has any kind of smooth surface like this stuff does, it will stick initially, but over the course of a couple months, it'll eventually start peeling up. There's just not enough surface area, I guess you would say, for the paint to grab to. It's too smooth of a surface. It just kind of like lays on top of it, and then once the chemicals start to dissolve out of the paint, it just turns into like flaky paper and flakes right off. You need a little bit of texture to whatever you're painting in order to get it to stick. That's just from my experience. So going with these pieces, I actually scuff them up with a Scotch-Brite pad. The upside to scuffing over the Scotch-Brite pad is it actually shows where the cracks are in the pieces. So I knew that these two were here. I did not know, I think this one, not that one. One of these other ones, this one right here. I could not see that crack right there in the back of that until I scuffed it up. It's actually the like sanding dust that's falling into the crack there. So after you do this step, you're gonna wanna make sure that you clean these off really well. I'm probably gonna use some isopropyl alcohol in order to clean them off, to try to get all this stuff out of there and blow everything out that you can of any cracks or anything like that, because that'll keep your paint from sticking as well. So we got these 4 scuffed up. I'm going to get the rest of these scuffed up, and then I'm going to show you guys how I'm going to go about fixing the cracks in these, so that when you prime them and paint them, they're a smooth surface. All right, so once you got everything scuffed up, make sure that you clean this stuff out. This white that you can actually see that's in the cracks here, right there and right there, is actually dust from this, from scuffing this up. It's actually part of the clear coat that's over top of this wood. Make sure that you get that cleaned out of there really well, because this will actually prevent this next step that we're going to be doing from adhering properly. I could probably get away with using a high build sandable primer, which I'm going to use anyways in this situation, to just fill those cracks in, because they're not crazy deep cracks. but I'm just going to make sure that these don't show through after we're done priming and painting, because I don't want to go through all the trouble of this and then after everything dries and settles, you start to see those cracks again. So I'm actually using this glazing and spot putty to fill in these cracks. I started doing this one. I kind of went a little overboard. You don't really need to go this overboard. I put it on my finger and then just kind of work your way back and forth across the crack, and that putty will actually fill in the crack, and you'll see the red start to fill in the crack, no different than the white powder does over here. So you're going to work this spotting putty across these cracks that you have in all this trim. And then once it gets down in all those, you're going to give it about 20 to 25 minutes to dry. And then you can come back over with sandpaper and sand it. So I'm going to go through and do all the cracks and all these pieces here. And then I'm going to let them dry, and I'm going to sand them, and I'm going to show you what they look like after they're sanded. All right, so I kind of wanted to show you guys too while I was doing this, what I was talking about. If you look right here, see how I started up here at the top of this crack and where I'm working my way down. When you get the stuff on your finger and then you're working back and forth with it like this, see how this crack is starting to turn red on the way down, like right in this area right here? That is you working the putty into the crack, and that will fill the crack up. So you want to do that as well as fill over the top of it to make sure you get enough of it in the crack to fill it up. And then what we're going to do after we get them all filled up like that and we get all the cracks filled up and everything, we're going to come back over and we're going to sand everything down flat and try to make it smooth across from one side of the crack to the other to where you don't see it anymore. And what's going to happen is you're going to sand all this surface stuff off, and you're going to sand it down to the point where all you see is the red crack. That's optimal, because once you see the crack and nothing more, that means the surface is smooth and the crack is filled in. And then we're going to come back over and we're going to prime over top of that with a high build primer. And then if everything worked as planned, you won't be able to see any of those cracks anymore once we go back over with the high build primer. So I'm going to finish these cracks up, and we're going to let this stuff dry, and then I'm going to sand this stuff down and show you guys what it looks like sanded down. All right, so I wanted to show you guys what this looks like after you've sanded all the putty off of. I used 320 grit sandpaper and I wet sanded it. You're better off using it with water and wet sanding to keep the sandpaper from getting clogged up. It actually keeps the putty kind of soft enough that you can like spray it back off of the sandpaper. Otherwise, if you try to do it dry, you would get like half of one of these cracks done and it would clog up the sandpaper and you'd have to wash the sandpaper. So just wet sanding makes life a lot easier. It allows the excess glazing putty to wipe off and run off, and it allows your sandpaper to stay unclogged. I wanted to show you guys here, once you get all your surface of your glazing putty off, you can see that the cracks that I had are red now. That red is the putty itself filling in that crack. And when you run your hand over this, you can't feel that crack anymore. So that crack has been filled in with that glazing putty to where it's a nice smooth surface. So now we're gonna get this all cleaned off. Mind you, this is still a little dirty with some leftover glazing putty and stuff like that. We're gonna get this completely cleaned off, wiped down with some isopropyl alcohol, and then we're gonna get this primed up. Before we do that though, I'm gonna get the rest of these pieces cleaned up and get the glazing putty sanded down smooth, and then we'll move on to getting this stuff primed. All right, so we got them all cleaned up. As you can see here, it's a lot easier to see now that everything's cleaned up and sanded. You can see those little red lines in all the pieces that I fixed. Those red lines are actually the cracks. They're now filled with that glazing spot putty. Everything's scuffed up, cleaned up really well with some isopropyl alcohol on a rag. I'm gonna blow them off once I move them over to the floor before I primer them. Make sure that you get them as clean as you possibly can. No leftover residue from the sanding process or from your scuffing process to get the other ones scuffed up to get them ready to paint. Just make sure you get them clean real good because the paint won't stick to areas that there's any like powder or anything left over. So get them clean real good. I'm gonna move these over to the floor and we're gonna start getting them primed. All right, so got everything primed. I put a couple coats on these. I kind of went heavy in a couple areas just to make sure that I had real good coverage. That's okay with this primer. This primer is sandable, so we're actually going to go back over this with some sandpaper and smooth everything out and any high spots that there might be. This primer kind of self-levels, so it really doesn't give you high spots. It more or less just gives you some rough areas just because of how thick it is. So we're going to go back over it and sand it. I'm going to wet sand it just because wet sanding makes it a lot easier to deal with the product that's coming off. It kind of gets washed away with the water, and it keeps the water itself, keeps the sandpaper from getting clogged up. So we're going to go back over this and wet sand it. So let's get to it. All right, so we just got done sanding this bottom piece here. This top piece I have not sanded yet. I wanted to show you guys what the end result is of sanding versus not sanding. So if you look here really close, you can see there's little bumps and pits and stuff here in the paint, this primer actually. All throughout here, this whole piece all the way down, you can see that there's like little bumps and pits and stuff like that. That's actually just high spots / some stuff that might have gotten in the primer when it was curing and stuff like that. Over here, if you look, none of that stuff is left in here. So all I did was wet sand with 400 grit sandpaper. It smooths out this primer, and I'll actually show you up here in the corner. I have a little bit more work to do up here in this corner. You can see where the color kind of changes up here in this corner. That's where the that roughness still exists. So what you're going to do is you're just going to sand this down until it's smooth and gets rid of the roughness that you feel in this piece after priming it, and get it smooth like this so that it's ready for paint. This is actually all smoothed out and leveled, so next process here is going to be for paint. So we're going to do the painting in the next part of this video. I haven't quite decided yet on what color I want to go with for the paint, so it's going to be a couple days. I'm going to go, you know, peruse the paint store, just kind of decide what I feel like doing as far as color goes, but I'll make up my mind. You guys will have to look forward to the next video to see what color I end up going with. I'm going to try to be a little different with how I do things. I don't want to just go with your same old, like I said, I'm trying to get away from wood grain, and I don't really want to go with the same old, like what's in every other car out there as well. So I'm going to try to do things a little bit differently. So you'll see in the next video what I end up going with. If you guys have any questions about anything that I did in this video, please comment down below. I'll be sure to answer your questions. I'd appreciate it if you guys subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys later.